What happens when two seasoned business leaders get together? They talk shop, of course. Sit back and listen in as Scott DeLong and Vince Moiso share from their experience around current issues facing executives, entrepreneurs, and their leadership teams. The CEO Podcast starts now.
Welcome, everybody, to the CEO Podcast. I'm Vince Moiso. I'm here, as always, with my partner, Scott DeLong.
Hey, folks.
And this is exciting. This is our 100th episode as we finish up our season 5, which is really cool, Scott, in retrospect, to think about how many episodes that we've done to this point, right, to reach 100. And as long as we've been doing it at this point, I think we've covered a myriad of topics. And we always try to stay on the forefront of really what's hot for our listeners right now. And the topic for today is a continuation of our conversation from one of our previous episodes around artificial intelligence and AI and the impact to business, but really impact to the world right now. And we have a very, very special guest, and Joel Neeb. I really appreciate you coming on to be our guest today. And Joel and I met recently at RuckCon. So you guys have heard me, most listeners have heard me talk about my experience with Rise Up Kings. Our very, very close friend, Skylar Lewis, who runs Rise Up Kings. It's an incredible organization. And I've gone through the refinery myself. And it's just an amazing process and really transformational. And so I was really excited when Skylar introduced Joel to me recently at one of the conventions, RuckCon 7, and Joel was a keynote speaker. And Joel was talking about AI, and his depth of knowledge is way beyond my own, certainly, and what Scott and I had come up with. In fact, Scott and I, in our previous episode, just really expressed vulnerably to our listeners that we don't know, and we don't know enough, even as business leaders. Like, it's happening so fast, and we just don't know. And I think I would venture to guess that most are in our camp, right? Like they just really don't know, especially if you're in small business. It's hard to keep up if you don't have the resources. But before we jump into that topic, Joel, I'd love for you to spend a little bit on your own background. And Scott and I are in the habit of allowing our guests to introduce themselves, because you're going to do a hell of a lot better job than I ever could. But your background is amazing. Obviously, a former fighter pilot, American Ninja Warrior competitor, and a cancer survivor. I mean, I'm just listing those three, which are incredible. And certainly when I heard a little bit of your story at RuckCon, it hits with a lot of people, right? So can you talk a little bit, just spend a few minutes on your background and your journey to help people understand how do we get to you talking about AI?
Well, Vince and Scott, thank you so much for having me on the show. Vince, great to meet you at Rise Up Kings conference. As you said, I am wearing the bracelet right now, and I wear that everywhere I go. I love it. Yeah,
I got it too.
It's a proud group that we get to be a part of, as you said. So my background, as you alluded to, I was a fighter pilot. I left the United States Air Force Academy at 22 years old and was put into airplanes at that age. And within about 4 months, was flying faster than the speed of sound and 3 feet away from my closest friends and going upside down in that configuration. And you can imagine going from driving a car one day to 4 months later, doing all those things in an airplane, what that transformation feels like, and just how much goes into what that took. And the thing that changed for me the most, and the thing that I took away from that experience, was not just an affinity for flying, though I certainly had that. It was an appreciation for this transformation that I just gone through, and how this team and this program and these incredible leaders had taken me from driving a car one day to flying faster than the speed of sound, close to my friend 3 feet away from another airplane in just 4 months. And so in my head, I said, I love flying. I don't know if I'll fly forever, but I always want to be a part of these types of transformations for the rest of my life. And so I had the opportunity to continue flying for the next 10 years. And believe it or not, it actually became pretty easy for me. Even in a fighter plane, at some point, you just get used to doing it every day. You kind of program your brain with the steps that you need to take to be successful. And I was at the point where I was interviewing for the next Thunderbird pilot opportunity, like the Navy's Blue Angels, except it's the Air Force's version of it, the Thunderbirds. And right around this time frame, I found out I had stage 4 cancer. And so completely took me off my plan to fly on the aerial demonstration team. And all of a sudden, I'm faced with the fact that I've got 18 months to live, and I've got 2 young children and a wife at home, and just all of those things that you can imagine that go through your mind in that moment. But I like to say it's the most significant blessing that I've received in my life, because it was also the turning point of my life. And they say that the dying have the most to teach us about life. And I think that's true, because in those moments of struggle, you are afforded clarity that we don't typically get. And you have an opportunity to see your priorities as they should be, and maybe not how they are before that clarity. And as I was going through this experience, I said, if I did have a second chance at life, I would do things differently, and I would go after other opportunities in life. And so when I finally did get that second chance, I had to hold myself accountable. I was one of the very few people who got a second chance after stage 4 cancer. And so even though I got back in the cockpit and continued flying after my cancer battle, I decided to leave the military just a couple of years from retirement and go get my MBA, and very quickly become the dumbest guy in the room in business school, because I had no idea how to engage on business outcomes, and they spoke a different language for me. And I had as fast as I could play catch up and read as many books as I could to learn along the way. And then I had the opportunity to join a consultancy, 30-year-old consultancy that through some luck, timing, and good results, I was the CEO of for the last 5 years of my time there. And then I went to our biggest customer, VMware, which is the 4th largest software company in the world. And I worked in the office of the CEO, where I led a transformation for 40,000 people from sales of software to something called software as a service, which really at its heart just means you have to change everything in your company that you do. Change your culture, change your operating model, shift your goal line from the sale to the actual outcome that you have to deliver in order to get paid. And so, soup to nuts, it was a complete transformation of the company. And all of this ended up being great preparation for the Insight Age and for AI. And we stumbled into it to a certain extent. Nobody knew that AI was going to come on the scene like it did while we were leading this transformation. But the things we did to prepare VMware for this next chapter ended up being the perfect things to prepare every company for the Insight Age.
Well, talking about the Insight Edge, I understand you've got a book.
I do.
Coming out in September. Is that accurate?
That's right.
Yeah. And it's called the Insight Edge. So I want to make sure that you get plugged for that as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Joel, let me start back a little bit and tell you where this became an issue for me, and why this subject became hot for me personally. Is that I've got a PR agency, and they do a great job, and they present me in a fashion to people, but they wanted to present me on the hottest topic, which is AI. And I said, absolutely not. You just can't do that, right? And one, I don't know enough about it. I don't claim to be an expert, which leads me to my point. How is it that we're seeing so many experts in a field that is almost brand new, or at least gotten to the public in a brand new fashion? What does it take to be an expert or call yourself a thought leader? And are there too many of those guys out there?
Probably too many out there, but to your point, it doesn't take much. And it's because things are moving so fast that if you're even a week ahead of your colleagues on these conversations, then you're a thought leader, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it reminds me of, remember when the internet came out, and there was a camp that never used it. There was a camp of people who used it, and then a camp of people who maybe were programming on the internet, and they understood the back end of it. And if you were just one of those people that was going to an internet site, and you remember in the early days, it would just be like a counter. It would say like, welcome to Walmart.com. You're the 1,300th person that's ever visited this. You remember that kind of thing?
Oh, yeah.
Not very useful, but at that point, you're ahead of most of the world on this new technology just because you've clicked on that website. So it doesn't take much in the inside age at this stage to feel like you're getting access to something that nobody's seen before because it's moving just that fast.
Okay. All right. That's fair. There's something I saw actually on your website. And it was a quote I did. And then Vince and I were prepping for this, he had talked about something else that you said. And I really want to get into this as well. And the quote is something close to, I'm going to paraphrase here. Everyone will have insight to the same. So you can't just rest on your great ideas, because everyone will have insight to those same great ideas. And he said at the conference, you said something along the lines of, we are in 10 seconds of someone else having that same great idea.
Yeah. Exactly.
And more of that.
I think, that kind of blows our mind when we think about it that way. But I would challenge some of the older listeners to remember in the early 90s, before the internet came out. And when you think about, gosh, you're sitting around talking with your friends and you say, who won the 1952 World Series? Do you remember? And you kind of argue back and forth, and somebody thinks it's the Yankees, another person says that the Dodgers, and who remembers? I don't know. Who's got a book on it? Maybe we can look in the encyclopedia. Can't remember. And then we say, oh, who knows? That one guy, Carl, who just knows all sports trivia. Everybody had a Carl in their life, right? Somebody who just loved sports and they knew all the trivia. So you call Carl up and you say, hey, Carl, settle this for us. Who won the 1952 World Series? The point is, Carl's phone has not rang in a long time.
Yeah.
Because none of us needs access to that type of information anymore, because we have something in our pocket that answers every single one of those questions. Every fact that we that we could look for, we have access to it. The reason I bring that up, we all know that, and of course that's old news. The reason I bring that up is because that was unfathomable in 1991, that someday we would have something in our pocket that made access to facts irrelevant. The fact that I could say that, I can answer that question, you say, yeah, of course, you Googled it, you looked it up. We all just take that for granted now. That's what's going to happen with ideas. That's what's going to happen with insights. That's what's going to happen with strategy, with roadmaps. All the things that we painstakingly build together from those facts today are going to be synthesized by artificial intelligence. By the way, an artificial intelligence which has a lot higher IQ than maybe our best team member with 140.
1,000 IQ. You said, I love it because I wrote this down. AI has a 1,000 IQ that never forgets the data. It's insane when you think about it, and it's true. And that's what we're dealing with.
Yeah. You can't compete. I mean, the fact that we'd even try to have better ideas at that point doesn't make sense. Just like I wouldn't try to come up with, beat Google on sports facts. At this stage, the ideas, we're not quite there yet. Keep that in mind. ChatGPT is not going to be able to do all of these things, but it's still going to be the advantage today, not 6 months from now, today, that allow you to beat your competition. But
so I got a different question around that, because this might have to do with my lack of understanding. Isn't it though, trailing indicators that we're looking at, all the data went in, and they are going to, and the AI is going to report on an accumulation of all of the old stuff that's sitting out there and summarize that and make some kind of a compromise in it, as opposed to leading thought, like getting out in front.
So basically you're saying it does a phenomenal job of reporting the news, not necessarily making the news, right?
That good way of putting it.
The analogy I tell you is about this ring that I wear, this Aura ring. So have you heard of this Aura ring before, Scott?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay. So an Aura ring, while we've been talking, it's been measuring my heart rate variability, and not my sleep, but it will measure my sleep when I am sleeping. And it gives me all that feedback. And up until a couple of years ago, because I've had this now for about 6 years, up until a couple of years ago, the only thing it would do is just give me that historical data. Just like you said, Scott, it'll tell me what I did in the past, and I can try to do a little bit better of sleep tomorrow based off of that.
Sure.
What's changing now, they just came out with this within the last 6 or 7 weeks, is now they're giving you forward-looking predictions. And one of the most interesting ones to me was this revelation that they can now connect what historical data they can see on your body to your future mental health. So it will literally say, based on your historical data, you're going to have a bad day within the next 2 days. 2 days from now, Thursday is going to be a bad day. You're going to have a mental health event because of what we're tracking in the past. So it's not just looking backwards. It's now looking forwards and determining what your day is going to be like in the future. That is a whole new level of insight. Once again, that's the 1,000 IQ that a person would never have come up with that connection, or at least it would have taken us a long time to figure out that there was a connection between my heart rate, my sleep, all these things, and a bad mental health day 2 days from now. And yet we're able to do that. That's the direction everything is taking. So it's not just mental health. It's what's the strategy for your customer? What's your company going to do next year? All of this historical data is being stitched together into insights and predictions for the future.
That's where that 1,000 IQ makes sense to me. And eidetic memory is one thing, right? And being able to summarize things is another. But having that 1,000 IQ and forward thinking is really where it makes sense to me to utilize this technology.
Well, my Garmin watch is doing the same thing, right, Joel? So now, which it didn't used to do. I mean, Garmin was primarily GPS, so I was tracking workouts because I cycle, and so I'd track those workouts. Or if I went hiking, I would track. But now it's tracking. I wear it to bed. It tracks my sleep. It tracks my heart rate. It's tracking basically if how many calories it thinks that I've burned through the day. So on and on, right? So it's gathering so much data on me. I'm interested to see what that next step is, even with Garmin, and as they improve their use of that data, which leads me to the question that I really have, because I wrote down, my biggest takeaway from when I heard you speak on this at RuckCon was execution. And so, there's a couple notes that I took is as I repeat that quote, we're 10 seconds away from someone else having the same idea, right? Execution is what really becomes critical. You used the term called strategic agility, which I really liked. And then ultimately it's all around data curation. Great. You have all this data. What the heck are you going to do with it? Right. And if you're a small business, right, how are you utilizing that data? What are you executing on? Exactly what? Because I think that's a question, in my opinion, because it's a question that I have. And I think a lot of our listeners that are working in that smaller business space would have the same question, right? Which is, great, I utilize AI, I leverage it, and how you're telling me I should be leveraging this for my business. Now I have this data. What the heck do I do with it? So when we talk about execution being critical, when you talk about that and you talk about strategic agility, can you expand on that? What do we do with all this information?
Such a great question. And the first thing I'll emphasize is that I love the way you said it, that Garmin is capturing all this data on you, because that's a really important part of the equation, that the data is being captured, that we're capturing the information so that we can make future predictions. Because it's not enough to have generic information about the industry or the market at large. We need to have, if I'm going to figure out when I'm going to have a mental health day, I need this ring on my finger, right? It's not who else in the world it's on, so I can look at historical data for the population at large. I need to see what's going to happen with me. The reason that's relevant is because that's the first step. We need to start capturing and curating the data for our companies. Capture as much data as you can possibly capture. I record every Zoom call at this point. I capture every bit of data for the new company that we just launched. And the reason is because I know that that is going to be the inputs for the outputs that I'll need later on down the road. So that's step one, capture the data. Now I'm going to address that second part of your question, though, which is, all right, I've got the data, and maybe even it gave me a great insight. What do I do with that? How do I make my company ready for this moment? And the way I explain that is I say, let's take a look at an example of a perfect insight and how we would leverage it. Let's say that you are put in a time machine and I send you back to 2004. And it's 2004. We've got President Bush in office, and we've got Blockbuster Video has locations all across the country. We're all going and renting DVD movies for the weekend with our families. And you have perfect information from the future. You came from 2024, 20 years ahead. And you go to the Blockbuster team, and they made you CEO. You're now CEO of Blockbuster Video. And you say, hey, C-suite, corporate staff, I got to tell you what's about to happen. You're not going to believe this, but I know you think we're ahead of everything and we're doing phenomenally well. This company, Netflix, is about to eat our lunch. They're about to take over. They're going to do streaming services. They're going to completely eradicate our market. We're going to have one store open in the entire country, and that's just for nostalgia, in 20 years, and that's it. And now you're going to blow their minds in this moment, but it's perfect information. how likely is Blockbuster going to be able to take advantage of that information? Let's have that discussion. I mean, that's not a rhetorical question. What do you think? How likely are they going to be able
Yeah.
to on that?
It's a great story, right? Because they were in a position to actually buy Netflix, right? And they chose not to, and really went the way of the dodo. And we know the ending of that story. Yeah, it's a great analogy because no one's gonna believe it, right? No one, I could be the CEO and I go to the board and I say we're going to buy Netflix. They're going to go, you're crazy. Like no one's going to spend money. No one's going to do subscription. No one's going to, they were already owning. I mean, I think at that point, if I recall, Blockbuster was trying to do that subscription model. Then you've got, what was it? Redbox was coming out around that time as well. So, you're walking up to these locations and you could just easily dispense a DVD, go home with it, turn it back for another one. Netflix was just in they weren't quite streaming yet, if I don't remember. I think it was just still
Delivery.
you get as many as you want. It was still a subscription model, which I think Blockbuster was thinking it was absolutely no threat to them whatsoever.
Right.
So yeah, I don't think they knew. I mean, the reality is they didn't know. They had the information, Joel. They had it. It was already right there in front of them. They didn't need someone like you or I coming from 2024 to tell them.
But wait. I want to go.
They didn't know what
I want
to
to
do
go into
with
that though, because I do want to challenge the assumption because and I hope, like, I'm normally the optimist in this group as well, but I'm going to be a naysayer here when I say this, is that how do I know that's perfect information? I mean, there isn't a time machine. We're not going back 19 years and taking a look at what was and the information that was available to predict the future. Where's the trust come in to believe that these machines can predict the future accurately?
Great question. And so here's where I go with that. The first piece is they had all the information, as you said, in 2004. They didn't have a crystal ball. They didn't know for sure that it was going to go this direction. But I guarantee the thought process they had was, we're too big to fail. We have this enormous brand. We have real estate all across the country. Like there's no way we'll be disrupted to the extent you just described. But for me, the most interesting conversation is, what if you convince them? You go back to 2004, you're from the future, and for whatever reason, they're like, all right, we buy it. This is what's going to happen. We lost our chance to buy Netflix. We just have to beat them at their own game. This guy from the future says that this is the way the direction the market is going right now. My question still stands. Even with that buy-in on this information, how likely was Blockbuster of 2004 going to be able to pivot and go in this new direction? What do you think?
Not likely, still not likely, because it's
Much embedded infrastructure.
Yeah, it's too embedded. I mean, it was so brick and mortar, right? So the level of investment and what they'd have to do to pull that back, I think they still make the decision that they made.
Exactly.
Regardless.
And I think that's the most important takeaway. And here's why. Because even with that perfect information, and Scott, you brought up a great idea. Maybe we don't know that it's perfect. If it's right now, we don't know what the right insight is at this point. We're still have to prioritize them. But even with perfect information, and you've sold me on the fact that you came from the future, you're telling me what's going to happen, I still have to figure out how to convince my culture that was based off of having this totally different business model in the direction we need to go, and this operating model, which is all my systems and tools and processes internally for how I deliver value. I'm going to have to completely dismantle and rebuild both of those things in order to go in this completely new direction that the market is supposedly going to take in the next couple of years. And my point is, your original question is, what do we do with these insights? Prepare to be disrupted.
Okay, great. So here's who we have to convince, though. We have to convince people that are probably going to be losing their jobs with this, right? So the real estate guy, the guy that's out buying all these blockbuster buildings, he doesn't have a job anymore. And I'm going to and he's on my executive team, and I've got to help. I got to get him to buy in so we can get convinced that this is the right path for us to go. So it's still a huge uphill battle because, and this is where I want to get to a little point on. Great. Are we replacing people? Do we not need people anymore? How do people prepare? I'm talking about executive, mid-level managers, and the workforce. How can we help them prepare? Because I don't want to fire a whole bunch of people either, right? But I want to take advantage of the technology.
So here's who was able to do this. and take people that were hired for one thing and transform them for another thing. To take one business model, to completely disrupt it and take it in a different direction and be successful. And that company was Netflix, because Netflix didn't start as a streaming service. Netflix started as an Amazon-esque distribution service where it would mail you out all these DVDs.
That's
so
right.
They built the best logistics system in the world, hired all the best operations management type people to build out this infrastructure for this. And you know what they did when they realized they were reaching the end of their market and they saw the technology going in a new direction? Completely disrupted their culture and their operating model themselves. Didn't wait for the market to disrupt them because then it was too late. They disrupted themselves with this insight and took it again in a new direction, said, we're completely dismantling this distribution. We're going to keep a little piece of it as a business unit within the company, because they still did that up until like last year. But you can imagine it was pennies to the dollar of what they're making with streaming. And then we said, we're going in this direction of streaming, hired an all new team to do that, created a new operating model around it. And then the other piece that a lot of people don't notice is that they did it a third time. Now they said, we're seeing Hulu crop up and HBO Max and Disney Plus and all these other ones that are now competing with us for the existing movie catalog. Because if you remember, there was a point in time when Netflix had all the movies. Like you just go to
all
Netflix.
of it.
Yeah,
That's
10 years
right.
ago. You saw everything. And they said, now we have to become a production studio
Content
and be
creator.
our own little mini Hollywood and make these
That's
shows.
right. That's right.
And we have no business doing any of these things. They went from a logistics company to a streaming company to a Hollywood production company. And every time they succeeded because they had a disruptible culture and operating. Those are the other two legs of the stool. It's not enough to have perfect information. It's about having the insight plus your culture and operating model that are malleable, that have that strategic agility, as we started this conversation talking.
Hey, Joel, so both you and Scott used the word appropriately, insight. And I remember when, when I was hearing you speak previously, is you called it the insight age. You literally said we're transitioning from the information age to what is now the insight age. And can you expand upon that a little bit?
It's the exact same concept that we had in the information age. And what happened in the information age? Information was commoditized, right? It used to be unique and an advantage to have access to information. Even as simple as in my house, if I had more books than somebody else growing up, there was a better chance that I would be smarter than that person, because that was the way we learned, is access to information. What do we tell parents back in the 80s to make their kids smart? You get encyclopedias, right? You go buy World Encyclopedia, Encyclopedia Britannica, you put them on the shelf, and hopefully that's the way our kids learn a little bit better than the neighbors. And of course, during the information age, I don't know anybody that has an encyclopedia at this point in time, because we all have access to the same amount of information. You would go to Harvard Medical School, so you'd have access to the training there. I can go in the streets of Calcutta, pull out my phone, and walk through a slum in India and read the same thing that somebody could see in Harvard Medical School. The information access became irrelevant, and that completely disrupted our businesses. And Sears and Kodak and Blockbuster Video all were victims of not being able to be disrupted during this time frame. So that's the information age. Well, the same thing's happening with insights. And just as information was commoditized, there's a line in a chapter page that's happening right now. That's the page is turning for this new era, where very, very soon it will just be taken for granted that ideas are commoditized as well. And that's the age that we're entering. And just like we had different ways of winning in the information age that were unique and new, we're going to have different ways of winning. You already alluded to one of them. It's going to be about execution in the insight age and strategic agility in the insight age to determine who wins.
Vince, I'm thinking right now that I wish we had 101 episodes this to ready to go, because we are just touching the surface at the end of our half hour together on what possibilities are there. What I've heard so far is that it's exciting and potentially scary, and now we have to learn how to make an impact with all of this insight. And it's going to be that's a conversation I think we should be getting to with our friends, with our neighbors, with our peers, peer groups like EO and all those folks. So Rock, wherever you go, this is a conversation we need to be having.
No question. I love using a case study of Netflix. It's really a great case study for disruption. Because I think people are challenged to disrupt their own business, their own culture. We talk so much about that, Scott, right? We talk about culture. I mean, just culture, just changing culture and adapting as the market shifts, as your own industry changes, things like that, as your ability to adapt and be agile within your culture alone. I think that's a great lesson, right? And Netflix is probably the quintessential example for that. So Joel, thanks for the reminder and thanks for bringing that up because but I got a ton out of it. I know our
Yeah, thanks for
listeners will
scaring the
too.
shit out of me, Joel. I appreciate it.
All right. You're going to have to bring it back for a future one because there is the plan of attack we have is one that everybody can apply right now. There are definitely some lessons learned. The really scary part, gentlemen, is that we all work for Blockbuster Video right now. We all work for, it's 2004, and we all work for Blockbuster Video. And change is coming. We don't know what that change looks like yet, but rest assured, we'll be completely disrupted over the next couple of years. But what I alluded to at the beginning of this conversation about what we did at VMware, we mapped out the strategy in exquisite detail. We transformed the culture to go from functionally focused to cross-functionally integrated. There's some really clear steps that we can all take at our companies, even right now, to begin to prepare to be disruptable in this new environment.
Joel, how can our listeners get in touch with you? To give us the best way to get in touch with you.
Yeah, check out theinsideage.com. Go check out the website. Also find me on LinkedIn. I have a lot of conversations on LinkedIn. Go follow the LinkedIn Inside Age group. We are building custom GPTs, which means AI modules that have specific tasks. We're teaching people how to do this. And just to get their hands dirty, kind of roll up their sleeves and actually using the technology. There's some amazing, amazing things you can do for your teams right now with the existing technology. And we all have to start just preparing to use it and better understand it. So come follow me there and we'll start a longer conversation.
Wonderful.
But I was going to share briefly, and who knows if you've listened this long, thank you for listening and sticking with the podcast. And I'll share this one last thing. So at RuckCon, it was funny. So when we did the Ruck Games, Joel, I don't think you participated. And at one point they had an exercise for us in AI. And it was really cool. I think Coach John was the one that had put this together, and it was actually really awesome. And what it was, there was a certain number of questions that you would answer with regards to the relationship with your wife, right? So very, very specific. So you're giving AI very, very specific direction, and then you input it into a Chat GPT type app. I forget which one it was, and it would spit back, and you'd ask it to write a haiku, and so it spit back a haiku. And so for me, I gave, I understood because I'd already been using AI a little bit. I understood the better information I gave, the better the output was going to be. And in one shot, I had this incredible poem. And so I took a card and I wrote the poem out in my writing, my handwriting, and I brought it home and I handed it to my wife when I got home. She says, "How was RuckCon? Tell me all about it." And I said, "Well, one thing was amazing, and I just want to share it with you." And so I handed it to her, and she read it. And you could see her face, like, "You wrote this?" Like, just literally, she was completely blown away. And I said, "Look, I kind of did, but I want to tell you what the exercise was." So I let her know, and she was blown away. One shot, AI spit back this incredible haiku. It's on my refrigerator right now, Joel, still on my refrigerator. And RuckCon was a month ago at this point, right? So anyway, this
amplifies everything in our lives. I mean, and that's a great example of how even something trivial, and somebody might hear that and think, yeah, but in that, like, you're cheating, like you got something else to write it for. You put the inputs in. You're the one who had to iterate and get it to a point where it made sense and sounded like your voice. And we got to get past this thought in our heads that it's not us doing it, it's you doing it. Your job's not going to be taken by AI. Your job will be taken by somebody who's using AI. That's who's going to be.
Okay.
That was ultimately my point. And I'm so aligned with that, is that I recognized that was a tool for me to create something really meaningful for my wife.
Yep.
That's it. End of story. So it didn't write it for me, because I gave all that input and I did it in a way to maximize the ability of what that output was going to be. And it was a beautiful thing. And even after I shared that with my wife, that I used AI to help me with it, it didn't make her think any different of it.
No.
So, pretty incredible. This is where we're at. And I think that the last thing I'll leave you with, because if you grew up in my era, it was Terminator all day. So we're just wondering, I think that the fear is when Skynet's going to come online, right? I mean, that's the future. We just can't help but think of that because that's what we grew up with. So that's we're attaching AI to this thing that could potentially in the future, in the very near future, totally change this world beyond what we can even see today.
Yeah, and I think the key there is that we don't give it decision-making capabilities, meaning it's something that we always lead and that augments us and that we don't trust it to make the decisions. Doesn't mean we don't get recommendations from it. Like I envision organizations that will be run by CEOs that get all their ideas from AI in the future, but it's still that CEO who's ultimately saying, I'm picking from these 10 options, this one that I think makes the most sense. The second we hand over the keys, though, to the decision to AI, we're in for some very bad outcomes.
So I know we're at time, Scott, but
We're past time, Vince.
Okay, we're way past time. So we got to spend 1 minute to finish. And I want to get this on the podcast because Joel, you talked about, I thought this was the best example. You had a buddy that called you up that was about to interview, I think for a C-level or an executive position with a company. And he was meeting with the, I don't know, chairman of the board or whoever it was. Right. And I think you had like 3 hours at that point. You got on a call with them and you utilized AI. Can you spend 30 seconds to a minute and just tell that story? Because it was pretty incredible.
Yeah, so this guy calls me up on a Sunday night and he says, Hey, Joel, great to talk to you. I have an interview with the CEO of this huge company that I won't name, but they have about $10 billion valuation. It's huge in tech right now. Most people know it. And he says, this call is supposed to be on Thursday with the CEO. The CEO just texted me and said he'd like to talk in an hour. He's got a trip coming up now and they want to get this interview knocked out. And I haven't done any prep. I'm not ready at all. Of course, I can't say no. And Joel, I know that you're friends with the CRO, and I know you two just talked. Can you just give me any idea of what they're focused on right now, or just point me in the right direction? And I said, no, I really can't, because when I talked to the CRO, it was a personal conversation. We didn't talk about business at all. But I said, I'll tell you what, jump on Zoom, and I'm going to do something for you. We get on Zoom. I look up that CEO on Google and I find a bunch of places where he was in the media in the last quarter. He was on Jim Cramer, Mad Money. He did a couple other things. And I took the transcripts from those YouTube conversations. And I just dumped them in a Word file. Very ugly transcripts. You can't even tell who's talking. It's just timestamps and words. And then I went and found their last earnings call and I took that transcript and I put it in the same file. Now this is like 200 pages long. And so there's very little use if you had a week with it, let alone an hour. And we took that and we made it an input into ChatGPT. We used plain English and just said, hey, ChatGPT, we got an interview with the CEO in an hour. We're looking for the role of America's sales lead, which is one of the biggest regions, of course. There's only 3, and you'd be running the entire thing. Give me 20 hard-hitting questions that the CEO cares about and how I can support him in my role, and then give me a 90-day plan to deliver on some of these key outcomes. It gave us that information. Wow. I sent that over to him. Now we're 10 minutes into this. That's all it took to get to this point. So it's 50 minutes to kind of read over these 4 pages. And he does the interview. It was supposed to go half an hour. It goes an hour. That CEO calls up my friend who's the CRO and says, that was the most insightful. That guy knew more about our company than anybody I've ever talked to, including analysts that I'm on the earnings calls with. He said, first of all, hire him, of course. But that was so impressive, and it blew his mind. Here's the takeaway. Some people will hear that and say, like, yeah, but isn't that a parlor trick? Isn't that, I mean, you gave him like the cheat. This is the thing. You can't give that to a 23-year-old and have that person get the job for America's sales. Those are the nuances that this person who had deep knowledge industry, deep knowledge of sales, was able to take this information, these 4 pages, and apply his PhD level understanding of it, and then apply it to this company in a way that he never would have been able to without this prep, without this information. And so what it does for us, it's effectively giving us a team of interns or a team of chiefs of staff who are doing all this work. He could have gotten here in a month with chiefs of staff and giving him, doing all this research and figuring it out and giving him a report to read. Guess what? We do that for our CEO. CEO at VMware would get that all the time. Before he goes to a customer, he'd get a report on that customer that included a lot of those details. So we do that already for folks to prepare them for these conversations. But now each of us has access to that. So just like in the information age, it wasn't important to have access to information anymore. It's no longer significant to have access to these insights any longer either. And that's a perfect example.
Great story. All right, gentlemen, we are way past time. Joel, I really appreciate you coming in here and sharing with us your level of expertise. For our audience out there, get in touch with Joel at theinsideage.com and pick up a copy of his book when it comes out in September as well. For the rest of you, thank you so much for staying with us for 100 episodes. It's been fun, and we're into season 5. This is a big kind of milestone for me. I'm kind of proud of this, so I just really wanted to thank everyone out there for sticking with us.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, Joel, thank you very much. Until next time, Scott, cheers.
All right, cheers.
Thank you for joining us for the CEO Podcast. Please visit us at theceopodcast.net, where you can learn more about our co-hosts and listen to past episodes. If you would like to have a discussion and dive deeper into any topic, there is also an option to contact Scott or Vince to schedule some time with them. Thanks for listening.